I'm so excited and honored to have doctors Stephanie Dewing and Eugenia Mora-Flores on the podcast to talk about their new book called Teaching and Supporting English Learners, a guide to welcoming and engaging newcomers. Bienvenido a dos.
Yay.
Gracias.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
I'm honored. Can you please each tell us briefly a story about teaching that has really changed your practice to this day, or a story that's really stuck with you?
Um, yeah, are you thinking about our own teaching experience or like the impact that it had on us as students with teachers?
Oh, it could be either. What a good idea.
Okay. Well, for me, the reason I asked that is because, one of the things about this book that was really personal and powerful for me is we are an immigrant family from Mexico. So growing up in the United States, our family put a lot of trust in the education system and the teachers that taught us. So I had this third grade teacher who she ended up having all my brothers and sisters and I. There were six of us. And, we all kind of funneled through. There's six of us within 9 years. So she had us quickly. But one thing I always remembered about her, and it was a moment when I realized now as an adult reflecting back as a teacher, like how much she got to know us as a family and how much she spent time just learning about what our family enjoyed, what our family did, the kinds of things that made us a family unit, And so one thing that she did for us was, and I'm not saying teachers should do this, but she would always buy us the class picture, and because our family couldn't afford it. And so she didn't buy us individuals, but she always made sure that my brothers, sisters, and I, when we went through her class, she got us the class one, and we have that one. Like we all have our little third grade Miss Mitchell, picture. And the reason that it impacted me, I think it was because there were so many times in school where I just didn't feel like I felt like, oh, they know that we're poor. Oh, they know that we can't do this, or the kids know this. And that was the moment where like, I just felt like everybody else in the room, they pass out those things. It's like scholastic book orders. Everybody passes out and you don't get one, or they pass out the pictures and you don't get one. And so it was this moment where it's like, oh my gosh, like I got one, and I didn't even know until later, she had bought it. But it just reminded me as I reflect back on teachers that impact me. And there's so many stories I can tell, but like just that moment where she made us feel welcome and special in her classroom, no matter what our situation was at home. And that to me was just a reminder of how important it is for teachers. Just get to know your kids, get to know what's that one little thing that can make them feel special, even if it's just a hello in the morning, like the hello, how are you? Like just something that, will trigger a moment of like, oh, I feel so good about myself today.
It's all about belonging, isn't it? And
yeah.
There's one story I'll share. Again, it's so hard to pick one, but one of my former students came over from El Salvador, and she was one of those who was in essence on her own. She did have an older sister that was there sometimes, but she inspired me so much, just showing up to school every day, working so hard. She would leave school and go to work till late at night. And then she would be doing her homework. And then she would come in to school the next day and want to come spend lunch with me so we could practice. She was working at a restaurant, and she really wanted to be a hostess. And so in order to move up to be a hostess, she wanted to practice English. So she would bring the menu, and at lunch we would sit together and I would pretend to be, a customer, and we'd practice and run through it. And, on other days she'd say, can we just read books together? And I was just so blown away by her perseverance and just her drive and her positive attitude through everything that she had been through and some pretty traumatic experiences. So she in particular, well, I always think of her, and, we're still in touch, and it's kind of fun to to have those moments to be able to see what was that trajectory after the classroom. So that's one of many, but one that certainly stands out to me from my years of working with this really incredible population of students.
Let's first, can you help us define the audience of students who you're writing this book for, and why an entire book on newcomers?
Well, I'll take the part about like the audience, and then I'm going to turn to Stephanie on the newcomer focus. But, I think in academia, so, Steph and I were at USC, just amazing work and scholarship comes out of the teacher ed program, in not only in teacher ed, but in our School of Education at USC. And that work doesn't always make it into the hands of the teacher, right? That the hands of the teacher, it makes it into the hands of the scholars or the hands of those who write the books. But, our audience was really to be the people in the classrooms working directly with the children. So whether it was the classroom teacher, the support provider, like the coach at the school site, the parent liaison, who were the people in education that were touching directly the lives of the children in terms of their education and their academic career. So it was, as I mentioned, like those who would work with families, those who are working directly with the kids, so teachers, coordinators, all that. That's our audience. Like we want the people who are living this work to be the ones that pull it off the shelf and read it and then find ways to make it part of the work that they do with kids and with families. And then the newcomer focus, I'm going to have Stephanie take that because she's a real expert in newcomers for us.
So, interestingly enough, this is the population of students that I have worked most closely with over the years. So when I hear all of these school districts saying we have such an influx of newcomers right now and we're not sure what to do, my initial reaction is fantastic. That's amazing. But we acknowledge and recognize that it is challenging. Our background and training might be a little different, versus someone who is trained as a math teacher and knows math. And then you have newcomers in your classroom and you think, whoa, wait a minute, I don't know what to do here. So, we wanted to answer that call that we've been hearing from so many of our colleagues in the field, just to say, hey, we need some help here. And there has been such an increase in, I would say, recent months and years of our newcomer student population. So this is on people's minds right now. So it felt like a good time to be able to share the stories, to be able to help in the best way that we can those educators in the field who are asking that question of, what do I do? And so, obviously sharing the stories, but really thinking about what are those classroom strategies, and we want to equip them and empower them to be able to say, okay, I've got something I can work with here, and I'm going to try this out. So that was really another reason why the newcomer population is just definitely on people's minds, and there are lots of questions and kind of that need for additional assistance. So we were happy to jump in and hopefully help in the best way we can.
And if I can just add just a little bit to what Stephanie said, we wanted to celebrate the assets of the newcomer, right? Like, because there's so much in terms of just media and the different messaging, about immigrants and newcomers. And, as Stephanie mentioned, this is a reality of what teachers are faced with is children are still children. They need to be educated. So whatever might be going in the political sphere, there's a lot that impacts their education, but there's also so much beauty in what they bring and the assets that they bring as an immigrant, as a newcomer to the country, to the classroom, to their families, that we wanted to celebrate that group too. We wanted to show the positives of it, how hard their lives may have been. There's so much that they are teaching us, and that we can learn from them, and that we can also tap into the amazing diverse assets that they bring. And we want teachers to see that too. And we want them to see the assets, not just the needs and the deficits.
So a question about newcomers, are you talking about students who are new to the country, or students who are new with beginning English proficiency, or both?
So basically both. We really are gearing this towards that population of students who are brand new to the country. Usually as the U.S. Department of Education defines a newcomer as someone who is born outside of the United States and who has recently arrived in the United States, usually within the last year or two, many of whom are just starting that process of developing English. But we do highlight the fact that really it varies. As all things language, there are so many factors that contribute to those starting points in that journey of learning English. So while many of them are just starting out, there are some who have studied English in their home countries, who are speaking English at home or with certain, friend groups or family groups. So, we don't want to make assumptions that everybody is brand new, but there is a commonality that while we do acknowledge they are all new to the country, the culture, the school system, that language development piece will vary from person to person.
Got it. So new to the country, maybe not new to English.
And I think that that's what we tried to capture with this book is we wanted teachers to recognize that diversity, because there are those assumptions that newcomers, everybody starting from, scratch with English, and you can't treat them all the same in your class, because you can very well have students who have strong English skills, but there's other things about being a newcomer that impact their educational experience. And that's what we were hoping teachers can see, that it's a book about newcomers, but in that chapter 2, you can see they are so different. So we can't just have a one size fits all way of approaching how we teach them. We have to understand who they are to pick the right approaches.
That's a wonderful segue to chapter 2 about sharing some stories about newcomers. Would you each share a story about some of the newcomers you've worked with?
Gosh, where do you start, right? This was such an incredible experience to like I said earlier, to be able to interview some of my former students. Luckily, we had the chance to talk to many newcomers that either we worked with or that others have introduced us to, and to ask these questions. I'm thinking about a couple of students in particular. I had shared a story earlier, but a couple who were highlighted in chapter 2 here. Babacar and Mariama. And while they were not related, their stories were similar, both showing up in my classroom at different times, but from Senegal. And it was so fascinating. I really do feel like I learned, as Eugenia mentioned earlier, so much from them and from all of our students about so many different things. Their linguistic backgrounds were fascinating to me, and how many different languages they already knew. And this is where I really got to see in real time too, how those skills do transfer over into that development of English, because they had already mastered multiple languages. So they were just kind of adding one on there. And what really blew me away about their stories is just getting involved and being willing to really put themselves out there. They were getting jobs. They were joining, pre-collegiate. I had a coworker who was trying to get everybody on the cross-country ski team. He had students from Senegal and from El Salvador and Guatemala, and all these warm climate places. I said, well, hey, you're in the mountains of Colorado now. Let's join the ski team. And they thought, sure about that, but sure, let's do it. So also just really seeing how that involvement in activities outside the classroom too really led to not only the development of English, which of course is one of the goals, but as we highlighted early on in this conversation, that sense of belonging, having that safe place where, many of them described as we had these conversations that it felt like a family. And that made such a difference to come to class and know I can be myself here. No one's going to laugh at my mistakes. No, this is a safe place where I not only get to be myself, but I do get to shine. They got the chance to be the experts in their languages and their backgrounds. So we always made sure to make space for that in our classroom conversations. But it's so fun, again, to be able to be in touch with these students now, and they're off changing the world, and to have had just such a small part in that journey and just watching that progression happen over time of, being brand new, not knowing anyone, being so new to English. And as in chapter 2, Babacar mentions how he admitted to trying to cheat on the initial English test. He's like, I just didn't know a word of English, but I just felt like I wanted to do well on this test. And come to find out that what he was really doing was trying to find French English cognates, which is a strategy we talk about. But in his mind, I was trying to cheat. I said, no, this is a fantastic strategy to use. But from that moment to then just, all of the involvement and making friends and, becoming leaders within our class community, but really within the school as well. And then again, going on to do amazing things, that just will always touch my heart. And, I'm just so honored to be even just that little blip, that small piece of that journey.
Not small at all. What are they doing now?
So the one that I was talking about in particular, Babacar, he has then started, or after he graduated, has gone on to school, but he was working for a refugee resettlement organization. And so he really wanted to pay it forward and help people that were coming after him going through some of the same situations that he went through. So he was helping families get settled and making sure that they were taken care of. And also, like Eugenia mentioned, helping to spread that word of the assets and strengths that our students and families are bringing to us. And so he has just been incredible in that respect. There was another Cristina in this chapter 2 who is a very similar story. She was one of the things that really made a difference for her as a newcomer was having a mentor program. So people from the community will come in to the school and just talk and open opportunities and talk about the future. And she found that so beneficial that she then now works for that same organization. It was a family intercultural resource organization. And again, is helping other families like her when she first came get settled and not only survive, but thrive and take advantage of all the opportunities that are out there. So it's just incredible to see those stories really kind of come full circle, and how it also highlights that really one person can make a difference in people's lives. So maybe whatever that conversation was with that mentor or that particular teacher that really brought the students together, that coach, the person who's saying, you're going to join this ski team, even though you've never seen snow, but we're going to do this. Those moments really do make a difference.
But the story I was going to share, and it connects a lot to what Stephanie was saying, is when this was one I personally had, my first grader, Maria, she was a newcomer from Mexico, and she had come to this country with very, very limited English skills. I mean, it was a new language for her. And she was always smiling, though. She was always smiling. You never knew Maria was always smiling. So it didn't matter that she didn't understand what was going on or she was lost. It always struck me because she was so happy all the time. And then what her mom and I had arranged was that after school, she would stay and help. And it wasn't tutoring on stuff because she was actually very ahead in her Spanish literacy. She was above grade level in her Spanish literacy in school. So it wasn't that she needed a lot of help in her academics, like in math, she was excelling, but she really wanted to build that fluency of conversation in English. So she would stay and help after school. We would just talk, similar to what Stephanie, you were sharing earlier about one of the students. We would just talk, like we would be getting the desk set up for the art project in the morning. We would just talk in English to each other so she could build that comfort and fluency of just learning to engage in the language and feel safe with it. And what I came to learn that really struck me about somebody like Maria was she left us for about a month in December because they went back to Mexico and they were working some stuff out with her dad. And I didn't know the specific details about it. So we lost her for about a month, and she came back. and her resiliency, her work ethic. And I think, Steph, that's what you were talking about, just the work ethic, the resiliency, the drive. It was so inspiring. I was like, oh my, and she came back, she's like, okay, we're meeting after school, like we're ready to go. Where other kids come back and be like, oh, what did I miss? I feel like I've been gone for so long. I feel like I'm left out. Oh no, she was just like, let's go, let's get to this. And so I see so much in these populations, just the will, the will and the drive. And I think what the stories in chapter 2 showed us is that, like, their will, their drive, their perseverance, their love for learning. Just I look at my own children and I'm like, what? They don't always have that love for learning. I get history was boring today, or why do I have to do this? And then I think about Maria and I'm like, she was like, what do I learn next? What can I do next? So there's this like beautiful passion and will to learn, that I feel that those stories shared with us. So Maria's my ongoing, and Maria was 24 years ago, because she was my third year teaching. Yeah. And she still stays with me. You talk about the impact that, the teachers have on the kids, but those stories and being able to remember, and I have so many little details I can remember about our conversations, and just seeing her walk in the room and her mom, and it's pretty awesome.
We're very lucky to be in this field, aren't we? Let's talk about social emotional learning considerations for newcomers.
I think, and I mean, I'll just kind of preface like a more global statement here, but I think that we sometimes as teachers, we get overwhelmed with the academics. Like, we have to take this test. We got to get them ready for their state exams. We have to cover this curriculum or these standards, that we lose sight of the fact that many times when students are struggling academically, it's not always because they don't get it. It's because there's other things going on. In terms of social emotional, I just wanted to share a quick story that's also struck with me. When I was a middle school teacher, I had a student who, brilliant, and then she just stopped trying. She just stopped trying. And I was like, what's going on with Christina? Like, I'm not sure what's going on. So, I was just going through the motions, right, as a teacher at the time. And I was like, okay, let's get to the next chapter. Let's do our literature circles, And then I finally one day said, I need to just talk to her and see what's going on. So I came to find out, and I still get a little teary-eyed when I tell this story, but she had found out that her mom had a terminal illness. And so it had impacted her very well. So, it had impacted her so much that she just, like, school was not important to her. It wasn't a priority. Like, her social emotional well-being in terms of her mental state, her ability to focus, was not like, I don't want to be here at school. Like, I want to be next to my mom. She was a sixth grader at the time. And, to know you might lose, that you are going to lose your mom. Like, it wasn't a will you. She knew she was going to lose her mother. And so to remember that kids have so much going on. And I know Steph has a lot she learned from the students about the traumas that they went through, the different stories. But when we think about educating a child, like, you can only educate them if they are there holistically, and that means their social emotional well-being. And social emotional is not just mental health. And I think people always think like, oh, we're just talking about mental health. It's a big part of it, but it's, how do kids get along with each other? Are they able to work in teams together? Do they have empathy for one another? Do they understand different experiences? There's just so much involved in social emotional, but like, without that, things really couldn't strive academically. So that's just one thing that just strikes me when I think about how important SEL is to the academic experience for the kids.
I'll let Stephanie add if she wishes. I'll let you dry your tears.
Well, and it's so true. Like, this is the topic that does get us emotional, because I think there are so many, and it intersects with that chapter 2, those stories, because it is the stories that are so powerful that, oftentimes, as teachers, we get so busy, and, like Eugenia said, we got to worry about this, we got to worry about that. But when we really take the time to listen and get to know them and get to know those stories, it's so powerful. And just asking the question, you notice something is off. And, we talked about that sense of belonging, that need to feel safe. All of that is not just well, that would be great. It really is essential. And I think about Cassandra, who is highlighted in chapter 2, and how she had admitted when she first moved to the country, she was just so stressed out and anxious all the time, she stopped eating. And, her health really suffered. And she basically said, all I really needed or wanted was for someone to ask me if I'm okay. And, I get the tears too, and I get the chills, and I think, it sounds so simple, to just check in. So like Eugenia, when you were checking in, with that student, and because you noticed something was off, and that's really what she was needing, was somebody to notice and say, something doesn't seem, something seems a little off. Are you doing okay? What do you need? Is there anything I can do to help? Sometimes students will be open to having that conversation, and some maybe not. Maybe they're not ready at that point in time. But asking the question is a huge deal to our students. I think there's just so much to it, but I think about, our day-to-day in what we're doing in the classrooms. And like Eugenia mentioned as well, when it comes to working with other students, and what is that dynamic like? And I think about Mariama in the book too, who shared with us that when the teacher said, hey, just go ahead and work with someone, that brought about a lot of anxiety because she's new and she just felt alone and isolated. And, how often do we do that? Not thinking about it. It's best of intentions. Like, yeah, we want students to be able to work with who they want to work with. But for someone who may not have those connections yet, we always want to add that yet, right? Because we know they will, but part of our role is to foster those connections. And so that really stood out to me too. Those simple little things we can do of, hey, Mariama and Cassandra, why don't you two work together on this project? And, it can be that purposeful pairing and grouping to find that right mixture. And maybe we don't get it right the first time, but, having that in the backs of our minds, those little things we can do, just checking in, acknowledging, I see you, I hear you, you matter, I believe in you. That has to happen before we can get to the academics. We have to set up that type of environment. And, the final thing I'll mention too, that's mentioned in here, because this still makes such a lasting impact on me, was the day that I'm with my newcomers class and we have a lockdown drill, which unfortunately that's common practice because it has to be in today's day and age. But I didn't know it was coming. And so as many of our students are coming from traumatic situations, it was certainly a trigger, because even though it's a drill, we have to turn off the lights, lock the door, hide in the corner, not say a word. Like, this is really triggering for so many of our students. And, the thought of, now my safety feels threatened, and I don't know what to do with this. I had a student actually admit that she was afraid of being shot on her way to school. And so then we're going to go into this drill here, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be safe here. So that was another thing that made me realize, again, it's just those daily experiences. So right after that, I went straight to the office. Like, I need to know when all of these drills are happening so I can prepare. We can have maybe a calming activity or something quiet where we're still participating in the drill, but in a way that's maybe a little bit less anxiety inducing and triggering. So, yeah, it really is the key to almost everything that we're doing in the classroom. That's the heart of making sure our students do feel safe and that sense of belonging, first and foremost.
Are there any strategies that you could share that we could use to get to know kids or create a safe space for them, a welcoming space for them?
One of my favorites is one that I had learned and then just kind of tweaked it and shared it with teachers, because I even use it at USC in my freshman course, is I wish my teacher knew. It's like one of my favorites because it allows you to be vulnerable as a student without feeling vulnerable, right? So the way that strategy works is simply, you hand the students each a Post-it and you just say to them, what's something you wish that I knew? Anything about you. They don't have to put their name on it. And we have a poster board up, and then they just come up, and at some point they just put it up on our I wish my teacher knew. And then I go through and I read them all, and I get a sense of like, oh, these are some interesting things I'm going to get to know about my students. And I've used it even with my freshmen at USC. And it's interesting how they'll open up when they think like, okay, I don't have to put my name on this. I can just say what I want to say so that my teacher's aware, and maybe they'll feel comfortable, hopefully, opening up, to the teacher about it further. But even in my undergrad class, I had a student that a couple of different things that they wrote. One had said, I wish my teacher knew that it's hard for me to get through a lot of readings, and I need to reread things. So I'm going to really struggle to keep up with the readings or something like that. And another one put, I wish my teacher knew I was an undocumented student. And, so like they just open up, and then I look at it and I think, okay, I know this about my class, right? So how am I going to approach teaching them in a way that is respectful of what they opened up about, that is vulnerable for them? And so I want to make sure that they don't feel threatened that they've said it. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, I know that was you, Stephanie, that said that one. So you're undocumented. I would never be a student. So this feels safe for them. And what was so awesome, just to see how this student felt was at the end of that class. And it's a class that's about learning about the Latinx experience in the United States. He wrote in his final exam at the bottom, he said, I'm proud to be undocumented again. And, to just see like Stephanie was talking about the full circle, like that he opened up and shared this. And obviously it was coming from a place initially where he didn't feel safe. He didn't feel like he wanted to share that with anybody. To then say, I'm proud about it again. I thought, okay, this is the kind of experience we want for them to feel. And it's surprising how much teachers learn. That's why I love this strategy too, because teachers learn so much and they're like, wait, why didn't they tell me this? One of the samples that we have in the book from a third or fourth grade class, the teacher was sharing with me that she was reading the Post-its and one said, I wish my teacher knew Spanish. And the teacher's like, I'm fluent in Spanish. Yeah. Like, how did they not know that? What have I not done to help them realize, like, I'm here to support you linguistically in Spanish as well. And then another thing said, I wish my teacher knew that I was doing good in math, but I'm not keeping up. And you think like, the barrier for kids to feel safe telling their teachers these things, but you give them a chance to just write it, secretly on a Post-it. They're like, here you go. I want you to know this. So for me, that one always stands out. And when I do trainings and I talk about get to know your students, it's always one that I share. We have so many in the book, but it's one that I say, there's a lot, but this one, just because I've used it personally so many times and have seen the impact, I really love.
Yeah, I'll just say I love that one too. And I use that in every one of my classes now. At the end of class is kind of an anonymous exit ticket. It's always optional, but I'm consistently surprised at how many take that opportunity to share something. And oftentimes it's similar. So you can kind of address it with the whole group. But I am a huge fan also. So I'll do that at the end of my classes. And at the beginning, there's purposeful community building activities. It might be 5 minutes, it might be 10, depending on the amount of time you have. Maybe it's a personal survey of some sort. Maybe it's, let's share our favorite breakfast food. Maybe it's, hey, let's create a class playlist. And then you get a chance to learn those things about each other. For me personally, I have a terrible memory. So I felt like I was always writing things down. I would have my class grids. And so I would have all my students on a grid, and that was always accessible somewhere on a clipboard or notebook or folder. So then I would learn, oh, this student loves, salsa music. I'm going to jot that down. And this student, was an actor in their home country or did a lot of acting in theater. And this student really hopes to be a professional soccer player. So I would gather that information over time, and they would build that sense of community with each other. And that's where you see that kind of family spirit develop within the group. Sometimes it was, oh, we have this in common. And other times they give each other a hard time, but in a fun way, because we became comfortable. So those community building activities, time well spent, definitely the I wish my teacher knew opportunities for them to share what they're thinking, what they're feeling in those safe ways are, I think, probably two of the most powerful strategies.
So we spent a lot of time on this podcast to talk about reaching students' hearts. Let's talk about reaching students' minds. You talked about designated ELD class. What does that look like? And can you share some strategies on how to structure that?
Yeah, so the designated English language development is really that what we like to refer to as that protected time of day. So it's time spent specifically focused on English language development each day. This looks very different based on your setting. So for example, for our elementary classrooms, maybe this is happening within a literacy block during rotations, and that teacher gets to work specifically with their population of students in that process. So looking at those language goals, those strengths and assets like we talked about earlier, and then, trying to continuously challenge. And there's lots of great strategies that I'm sure we'll talk about too for how to accomplish those goals. But that designated time is really specifically focused on that language development piece. Of course, content will be learned throughout. So the content and language are really inextricably linked, whether we're talking about that designated ELD or that integrated ELD. It's just in that designated time, that language is really that driving force to help that progression over time, with lots of meaningful opportunities to interact and engage across all of those domains of language: listening, speaking, reading, writing. At the secondary level, it often is its own class. So for example, if I have my Newcomers class, they were with me during, let's say, second period of the class day. And that was our time to really focus in on that language development piece. Eugenia, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I just want to add to Stephanie's definition is that one thing that makes designated language time really effective is if students are grouped in a way that are meeting their specific language proficiency needs. So as you probably know, throughout the day, they might be mixed with all different language proficiency levels, as they should. Students that are at more advanced levels, English dominant students that are still learning the language as a second language for the first time. So there's such a range. But during that designated time, it's to say, okay, I'm going to offer this time of day, and I'm going to bring together the students that are on maybe the spectrum of like more emerging, newer language speakers. So I can target that specific need, right? Then I have students who they probably are pretty conversationally fluent in English, but are still struggling academically with some of the demands of English in terms of different content areas. Well, I wouldn't do the same thing for them as I would for students that need to know what are the alphabet letters in English, what are the sounds that they make. They're already reading, but they're still struggling to write that history essay or to be able to have a critical dialogue or debate with somebody in English over a scientific topic that they've been given. So I'm going to do that kind of work with this group during that designated time. So it's important, as Stephanie was saying, that it is a time that you focus on language. I'm focusing on language. That is first and foremost. And I'm going to use all kinds of content to teach that language through, but language is my key. But at the same time, what's also really important is that they are grouped during that instructional time in a way that meets their specific English needs. So sometimes you'll have schools that will mix kids' grade levels, and they'll have a time of day when everyone's doing designated time, but it's, in the morning for the first 30, 45 minutes. And I'm going to take all the first, second graders who are brand new to language, because it's a small group. And I don't have a lot of first graders, but they're second graders, right? So I can mix them because I'm targeting their language needs versus their academic, different content area needs.
We talk about in that ELD time, establishing comprehensible input and strategies for output.
Yeah, so our big strategy, and definitely within those, there's a lot that overlap. Sometimes strategies that are good for input are good for output, but we look at it as I selected strategies that make, for example, on the input side, what I'm learning accessible to kids. Right, input is like I'm getting it. Right, so strategies that make what I'm teaching more accessible to students is helping them with the input piece. So when we have teachers use, and as simple as it might be, it's really powerful, an image to go with the core vocabulary, or the teacher reads aloud part of the text or the passage because the way I read it can give some meaning to the text. As well as kids that are also reading it. But then you can also see where, like Stephanie mentioned, cognates. If I'm giving the cognates, I'm trying to give them more access to what it's about. So sometimes it's not that as the newcomer, I understood everything that was just taught to me in terms of the language, because maybe I need more language skills. But as a teacher, what did I do so that the core of this lesson became accessible to the student and they felt like they can keep up and develop that understanding? So on the input side, it's that accessibility, the accessibility. And this is just transition that to the output side, because one thing that helps with input is getting to talk to a peer, right? So if I'm pair sharing with you or with Stephanie, that helps me understand, because maybe my peer can explain it in a way that is more helpful, or maybe my intentional pairing, they were able to share a little bit of primary language so that I can access what we were talking about. But at the same time, a pair share can also be an output strategy, right? So there's some that will overlap depending on how I'm using it. And, actually some just do it naturally. So on the output side, I always say our English learners are brilliant. There's like so much up here, right? So much. And what happens is I know more up here than I'm able to verbalize, right? That's the same for all of us, I think, too. Like there's so many times I'm writing an essay and I'm like, I know what I want to say. I can't figure out how to put that logically and in some way to make it sound proper in terms of the audience and everything. So there's so much up here that they're taking in. And we can't leave strategies to that, because now I need to get it out. Like I need to know, you're asking me to give you a comparative response. How do I say that? What are the words that I can use so that I'm making a comparison? Or if we're looking at the exact same content, we're studying animals, and you asked me to compare them, it sounded one way, but now you're asking me to describe the animal, that might sound different. But then now you're asking me to prove which animal might survive in this ecosystem more than others. My language is going to be different. So I also need to provide strategies that will support what it should output like to meet what you're asking me. What are the communication needs? And then how do I successfully do that? And I always remind teachers, output strategies are not all verbal, right? We have creative strategies, like design something, create something, show me what you've learned. Graphic organizers are great. Talk about an output strategy. They've been around forever. We've all been Venn diagramming since we were kids, right? So output strategies, like a graphic organizer, as simple as that might seem, goes a long way, because for an English learner, when you looked at that graphic, you said, oh, we're going to be somehow connecting things to each other. But then there's another graphic that shows things going out. And you're like, wait, we're going to be putting something down about how things like are not connected. Maybe they're separate in some way. So tools like graphic organizers are an output strategy, sentence frames, an output strategy, paragraph criteria charts, output strategies, like help me know how to craft my thinking. And that's what the output's about.
Yeah, that was answered so beautifully and comprehensively. I really don't have much to add to that, because I think you captured that so well. But I will just add one kind of final thought to that. But we talked about thinking about strengths and assets earlier. So if we have some of that flexibility built into how can students demonstrate their understanding and their learning to us in different ways based on those different levels of English language proficiency. So if we know that, let's say, they have comprehended a lot, or maybe that social language is more fully developed than that academic language, can we find that way to, as Eugenia mentioned, maybe a peer collaboration, or being able to talk through an academic idea or concept. But there are so many great ways to be able to do that in the hands-on. Obviously that visual support. So many of us, we've been graphic organizing for years. But I also think, that learning by doing and just being able whenever we can to get our hands on something and be actively engaged. The great thing is, as we talk about frequently, is these strategies are really beneficial for all of our students. They are just more essential, really, for those who are in that process of developing English. But it's great to be able to use these strategies for all of our learners. And then as they build more of that language, then we can start, removing some of those too. So maybe we have those sentence frames for those who need it, some of that first language support. But then, over time, maybe they're not needing those as much. So it's such a fascinating process to be a part of and to witness and to help in these, I would say, simple ways in a lot of cases to really maximize that benefit for our students.
Yeah, if I can just add to that too, something that you mentioned earlier, Tan, about the integrated work, the designated work. I think what Stephanie had shared earlier about, Stephanie, you were saying like some teachers are just great at math. Like I'm the math teacher, I'm really great at it. Well, we wanted to empower teachers to realize that, yes, like you are the math teacher, but we still have a responsibility to teach our content in a way where students understand it and can tell us what they've learned, right? That takes language. So whether you're the chemistry teacher or the math teacher or the PE teacher, we are responsible for delivering our standards and our content, which means there's language involved. Language is about communication. So if I'm communicating my content and my standards to my students, then I'm also responsible for language. If I'm asking my students to show me what they've learned, show me that mathematical operation, show me how they made sense of how open and closed circuits work, explain to me why this ancient civilization fell. All of those different content areas require students to tell you what they've learned, which is output, which means, to Stephanie, your point earlier, these are EL strategies, but output is output. All students have to share their learning. So whether you are more, doesn't seem like it's so language intensive discipline like ELA or ELD, we are all still responsible for helping students access, interpret, and produce language, right? And I think that's what we were trying to accomplish with those strategies in the book. Is like anybody can do it. It's not just the ELA teacher that this will make sense for, or the ELD teacher. Math teachers, they're accessible to you too. We want you to see that your students need the support outside of ELA and ELD.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's a wonderful way to end our podcast with our final question. You really talked about everyone is a teacher of MLs because everyone needs to teach the language of their discipline. Every discipline has its own language. What strategy have you noticed that is most essential or that helps students acquire English the fastest? We'll end with that.
That's a good. I don't know if I pick one, but I'll pick like a type of strategy. I think it's output. Use your language. Develop a classroom culture that feels safe. So the SEL piece is huge. And then if you want kids to become more active, successful users of a new language, they have to use it. We can't be in classrooms or watch classrooms with multilingual learners that are passively just receiving language. So strategies that have kids using the language, for me, it's like, that's when you're going to start to soar. Right. And whether it's small group, whole group, pair shares, group work, create this, draw this, take these and put them in an order for me, or little kindergartners grabbing the color that I call out. You need to utilize the language, and that's going to help fuel your fluency in it.
For me, I would wholeheartedly agree. For me, I think building that word wealth is huge. So that vocabulary piece And I say this partly because I have seen that to be extremely effective. But on a personal level, I love vocabulary. I love teaching vocabulary. I love seeing my students use vocabulary games. We're labeling our whole classroom, finding those great ways to engage and, as Eugenia mentioned, use the language. You can have contests of, when to use vocabulary just to get that repetition and those meaningful opportunities. And helping them to identify those patterns, whether it's cognates or, as we help our students to see what that looks like, whether it is cognates or prefixes, suffixes, and they start building that word wealth and that knowledge, then you just see this whole world open up, which is so much fun to be a part of, and an excellent way to really help that process as effectively as it can be.
Well, the book is called Teaching and Supporting English Learners. You have helped us with this podcast to teach and support our students. So muchas gracias por tu tiempo and your scholarship.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us and for helping us spread this message. That's what we care most about is that teachers and students are impacted. So,
yes, thank you so much. It's great to spread that word of, for our multilingual learners, that you're amazing. We're so happy to be a part of this process and this journey.